Hi everyone, thanks for joining me for another Watercolor Secrets Revealed tutorial. Today I will share 5 of my top tips as we paint the beautiful Sorrento in Italy. My very first tip, number 1, is a wash of clear water in the sky first of all. You can use your mop brush, come down over the far ridge of mountains with your water, and avoiding the building structures and avoiding the nearest mountains. And just then add your pigment, which is Windsor Blue on this occasion. Still using the mop brush, and then come down. This will enable you to have more control over the drying of the pigment and achieve more accuracy when you get closer to structures. Then dry that off with a hairdryer, and we have a slightly darker version of the Windsor Blue, so you can mix a tiny amount of the red with it, such as a light red. And now I'm using a number 12 brush. This one is new, it has a pretty good point. It's inexpensive. So the distant mountain range is being painted in there, and we'll soon be coming to tip number 2. So continue with that, just as accurately as possible, painting the distant mountain range, coming down to your nearer pencil lines and going around where the property structures are. When you go around the property structures, that's called negative painting, and we're going to come across that a bit later, which I'll talk to you about as a further tip. Now, this is quite a lengthy painting. It's a quarter sheet of arches, 300-pound rough. Measures about 15 inches by 11. And so it is quite a long painting, so occasionally we'll trip forward on the video as we progress through the painting. Otherwise, the tutorial would take many hours to complete. We're still on the distant mountains, sort of coming towards the middle ground area. Light blue being painted in. And that Windsor Blue pigment, like most of them, goes a very long way. You only need a small amount of it, and you can mix up a great amount of pigment. Now, tip number 2, the lifting of pigment with a bristle brush, a brush that is normally used for oil painting. You can dip that in water, and then on a dry area where you want to lift, you can apply that water with a brush, scrape it along, and then lift with a tissue. This gives a nice fused type effect in that distance, where we have the mountains with different contrasts of light and dark colors and hues and so forth. And here again, I'm using it to lift in areas where there are variations in the rock between light and dark. That was tip number 2. Now we're painting the structure of the building. Fortunately, at the top of this building, there's a nice yellow facade, which helps draw the eye. So we're putting that in, and you will see that on that occasion I painted in some shadow first. Your shadow would be a mixture of your light red and Windsor Blue, and that can be drying off. Go to a smaller brush, and now we're giving you another tip. It is a tip for negative painting, tip number 3. You can paint around certain items to leave the paper white because you wish to then paint those separately. So for instance, it could be a window, a doorway, different aspects of the structure of a facade there, and leave the white paper, and that's called negative painting. The building here will take quite a long time, so you will see that we demonstrate so much of it in the tutorial, then we jump forward. As I said before, otherwise it will take many hours for the tutorial. Now I'm dropping in a shadow area, and I can come over that doorway, which I left as white paper. And you will see that it still stands out. The facade of the building is a mixture of yellow ochre, Windsor yellow, and light red, with variations in it to make it interesting. That is one of the tricks of watercolor painting, to give as much variation in hues as possible, rather than one boring block color that is totally annoyingly uniform. So just remember that you can vary it and drop in little intensities of strength of pigment here and there, little variations to make it more interesting. Having completed the main structure of the building and a rock area with little outcrops of growth on it, green and yellow that you see, I'm now going to the middle distance, and I'm dropping in with a smaller brush a mixture of the Windsor yellow and sap green, some Windsor blue as necessary, to show variation again in the greenery there. It's a mixture of bushes and trees. There are little outcrops of rock here and there, and little parts of building structures and so forth, so it's quite varied. And in that middle distance, so it's quite varied and interesting. Once again, using some of that negative painting technique for the distant buildings on that hillside. Just painting around those structures, and then you can paint the facades of those buildings. The style really is a combination of representational realism and a little bit of the impressionistic approach taken to it as well. We're trying to achieve a painting, not a photograph. Not too much longer now, and I'll be talking about tip number 4. I'll be coming up in a minute or two. I think the good thing about this particular subject matter is the variety involved. You've got the distant hills there, the middle ground, you've got all the various foliage coming out, outcrops, you've got rock areas, you've got buildings, and the principal building on the right pushes your eye into the building. The areas of the buildings on the far distance, and the various rock formations and so forth. So for tip number 4, I would suggest the side of the brush scraping technique, as I'm demonstrating now to you. And you can see that I load the brush with pigment, and then I scrape that along and stipple it and so forth, where we have a combination of trees and bushes, and that enables us to get a realistic finish and a good variety in that area. So that was tip number 4. Final tip number 5. For the ocean, like we did in the sky, run a wash of clear water first. Come down to your pencil line edges, and then whilst that's wet, you use your blue pigment, your Windsor blue, on something like a number 12 brush, and you can paint in the ocean as a wet in wet. Along with that, and you come all the way down to the bottom, and then whilst that is completed and then still wet, we'll be adding some darker pigment. So starting lighter and getting darker. So now at the very bottom there, a much darker version of the Windsor blue into the ocean, starting at the bottom and working your way up the painting. I think the painting is looking quite effective. It has nice variety to it, and whilst that water or the ocean is wet, drop in your greens and yellows for your reflections. And there you would use a flat brush, something like a half size, so that you have much more control over what you're trying to achieve there with those very subtle light reflections. Okay, here's a completed painting. I think it looks quite effective. I hope you've enjoyed that and found all those 5 tips useful. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.